Right, welcome back. So we've built the spindle up, as you saw in the last video. There she is, ready to go. I've literally dabbed my finger in some oil, which is the same oil that's in the spindle lube. Now Haas recommend the Mobile Super 3000 5W20 for the spindles. It's actually used in the whole lot, so it's the whey oil, lube system oil, and it supplies the spindle as well, and that's on their recommended list of oils to use, rather than what used to be, I can't remember if it's like a Vactra, something like that, which they, after all the years, say is too sticky. So I've literally just dipped my finger in there with the glove, and I've just wiped it around the bearings so they've got a little coat of oil. Let's let the dog out. Come on, dog. You want to go outside? There you go. Save her barking through the whole video. So I've literally, just had my finger in there, wiped a light coating of oil around the bearings. Now, already a few people are commenting that I can't believe you didn't put grease in them, or you've forgotten to put grease in the bearings. Now, these older Haases are an air oil mist system. So the bearings are lubricated from an oil spray that comes in off of the top cap. So this is the top cap here, and your spindle shaft will sit through here, and this will be where your tool release piston comes down onto the drawbar, etc. Now this fitting on the side here is an 827 MPT fitting, and the airline blows through there, and you can just see in there you've got one of them like stone gauze type filters. Now through here is an air supply, which I think it's all regulated off the back of the machine, and it runs through at 17 or 18 psi, and while the airline is running you get droplets of oil drop into that airline, and that is the mixture for the air oil lubrication system for the spindles. So when this cap, let's just turn this over a sec. So when the spindle's in and assembled, and this is bolted on here, then you've got your pulley setup will be up here, etc., with a little bit of space. You'll have an airline going in there, which of course will be feeding, move this out of the way so you can see. So if you imagine that being here, because it sits level, roughly level with that collar, the air oil is going to come in here, it runs through the top pair of bearings, lubricates them, then it runs down as a spray and a mist over, and it lubricates the bottom bearings, which are the main spindle bearings. And then that's why on the Haases you'll notice when the machine's been turned off overnight, you'll often see oil dripping from the spindle nose, and possibly this runs running a warm-up cycle. I don't know if you'll see in here, you may or may not, because I had this on earlier, so you're probably not going to, but you'll often see oil dripping out from around the edge when it's been sat a long period of time or overnight, because the oil runs down through the bearings and comes out of the nose. So that's why I've not put grease in them. Now I actually spoke to the guy at Midland Machine Tool Recon, who said you could change it to grease, because for 7,500 RPM, let's just readjust that, for a 7,500 RPM spindle, grease packed shouldn't be much of an issue, but I don't want to get into changing it from how it should be on there, so I'm going to leave it as it is. A kind of grease packed for life spindle is probably a better option, because then you're not worrying about what the air oil lube is doing, and if it messes up, because if it dries up or stops supplying the air and the oil, that's going to cause you a problem, and it's going to destroy your bearings. And the other thing with this one, I think why it failed, by the looks of how rusty this original collar was and how bad the bearings were, that maybe there was water in the air. So maybe that specific machine, because it was a big shop, properly set up, maybe that specific machine was running off a different compressor that didn't have an air dryer on it. I never used to have an air dryer, but I do now. So I've got a good air drying system on my compressor, and the air dryer is absolutely massive and overkill for mine. So my air dryer is up there, very big air dryer, 2 filters, so that should be fine. I'm confident that we're going to be okay with that. So I've cleaned the inside of the spindle housing or cartridge, whatever you want to call it. A light bit of lube on these bearings, just to start with. So now I need to turn this upside down, put the spindle in it. I've sort of made sure there's no dust and dirt and debris, as well as I'm gonna. So if I turn this now upside down, rest it on these blocks. Now they're sat there, now they won't go in on their own, that's going to need a light press. So I'll put that into the press there and I'll press it down. One thing that I haven't mentioned, I don't need to take this out to show you, but the height from this bearing face, including the centre spacer and then to the back of that bearing, I measured that. And I just jotted down some numbers here because I wanted to make sure that the bearing height was ever so slightly under to what the lip on this spindle knows. So you want this ring to be ever so slightly touching and compressing on that bearing. So there's a shoulder in the back of the housing that the bearings will butt up against, and then you don't want any gap between this outer race and this raised lip, because that will keep your bearings compressed. If, for example, that shoulder was worn out or this nose piece was worn, let's say the bearings had started to spin in the housing and this was worn out, if there's no gap there, I think that's where you can get your end, a small bit of end float in your spindle. On some of them, if you look, when you push the tool release piston, if you look very, very closely, you'll see this spindle nose move in relation to this front cap or this nose cap. And I believe that's where the bearing stack height and the recess on this lip is incorrect and allows a bit of movement. A tiny bit of movement, it's not really going to hurt, but it shouldn't be there. So I've measured that and I've measured that, and I think from, if my measurements are correct, I've got about 0.06 of contact before it bottoms out here. So what do you call that, 0.06 millimeters of squish, so to speak, and you're only doing these up by hand, so you're not going to cause any damage. You just don't want there to be a gap so that bearing pack can float. So let's put this in the press and we'll just put something around the outer race here, not on the inner race, on the outer race, and we'll just push these back to the shoulder. Okay, so because it's just going to be a light press, I've just put the nose on there and this little bit of thin wall alley tube, and that should allow me just to press them down into the housing there. Shouldn't take much to press them down. Nothing at all. A little bit of a wiggle on the top there. We lift our nose back off and I'll bring it back onto the side here. Okay, so there's the bearing install back on there. Now we fitted a new O-ring inside this cap, so because this should touch the outer race of the bearing before this whole thing bottoms out, The reason you've got the seal on there, if you can see that rubber O-ring seal, is because you're going to have some tiny amount of gap that stops that bottoming out. So it's going to be quite difficult to see, I think, but let me see if we can see through there. Maybe if you just look to the side here, you'll see that that nose is not touching. It might actually be better if I can take that O-ring off for a second. Let me take this O-ring out and then we'll be able to see that we've got a gap there. Okay, so the O-ring seal, we've taken it out of the groove now. And this is probably going to be very difficult to see. I don't know if you're going to pick it up there. If you watch at the edge, you can see there's a very slight gap there, ever so slight. Obviously you're not looking to crush the bearings down with the cap or anything, you just want there to be a slight gap so that there's always tension on it. And this is a 0.05 feeler gauge and that just slips in there. So we know we've got around 0.02 of squish, so to speak, to hold them bearings in. And when you put the nose cap back on, obviously remember to put the seal back in it, because that's going to stop your coolant and stuff getting in and causing any ingress of dirt and what have you into the bearings. Make sure we're good. Now on the nose of this spindle housing, then it's the same on the other one, so maybe it was a factory thing back in the day. They actually put 2 punch marks at the very front of the machine, so if this was turned over and you're looking at it, on the right hand side here you would have your 2 small drilled and tapped holes there where you can set like a fixed block if you're running like right angle tools and the holder has to be mounted, or I think you can use external what they called like external coolant, through spindle coolant add-ons. So there's, where have they just gone, 2 dimples that match on there, which will line up with these ones. And that is the orientation and the front of my spindle. And these 2 tapped holes, as you look at this machine and the spindle's mounted, the 2 tapped holes will always be on the right hand side. So we've got the bolts for this here. Got our bolts to put in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a bit of medium strength Loctite. A bit of medium strength Loctite and just put one dab on each bolt so there's no issues about them coming loose. So get me, I'll go get the Loctite, put a dab on and we'll do them up. Okay, so I've just put literally 1 drop of Loctite on each bolt. And I'm just going to do these up hand tight because they don't need to be rawed up too much, I don't think. I do periodically check in the machines that these are still tight in case they do come loose. And it's probably easier to, once it's in the machine, I could have Loctited them when the spindle's back in the machine, sorry, so it's easier to tighten them up. But I'm just going round bit by bit to help me stop it spinning. I'm just going to use a screwdriver through there, it's better. Can't hold on to it with oily gloves. Shush dog, you can go out in a minute. She wants to get outside because my landlord's moving stuff around with a forklift and she feels like she's missing out. Okay, so that's the nose refitted. Again, make sure your dots line up and you're going to be in the right place. And now what we've got to do is turn this over and look at the back side. So obviously it all gets a little bit heavy now. And then that should be all we've got to do on that side of the spindle. But we need to put the top collar on. This collar also has a recess here, or a step, top hat, spigot, whatever you want to call it, that will go down and sit to just compress that a little bit. Now, there's not much there, but obviously the top is not as critical as the bottom. But this one doesn't have an O-ring. There's no O-ring that sits in this one. It's just bare alley with a recess in there where your oil comes out, which once it's in allows it to go around and get most of the bearing. And we turned this top face off because where I jacked the pulley down with the two, I think they're half UNC threads, we'd made marks all in the top of this. So I just turned 0.5 millimetre off there to clean that face up. So there is an orientation to this, because if, let's say, where's our dots gone? So the dot's there for the front of the machine, so this is how we look at it. The air line for the oil air mist feed comes in over this side, this back edge. So you want to make sure that's orientated correctly. So mine is coming out here, because the line in the head casting, the line comes through the side of the head casting into here. So make sure you don't do this the wrong way round before you put this pulley on, because these are an absolute nightmare to get off. Very, very difficult. If you put that the wrong way around and put this on, you're going to have trouble. So make sure you do it the right way, which again is this way. So I'm going to get them done up. Then the next thing after that will be putting this back on. Now I need to go back on my own videos and check, because there needs to be a gap between the top of this cap and here, because if you push this all the way down, I think I had about 2 millimetre space that this was pushed down. So what I'll do is heat this up, and if there was a 2 millimetre space, I will get some, I'll look back on my video and see, but for example, I'll get some pieces of addy like this, which are around 2 mil. I'll slot them on the sides there, so when I drop the pulley down, it sits on top of these, and then I can pull them out, and then that way we've got our correct gap. I don't think you can really move too much on the gap, but bear in mind, if this is not aligned with the pulley on the gearbox, the belts are going to be trying to deviate in height. So I will look back and see what this was to what I'm going to reset it to. So let me get all this sorted, bolt the top cap down, and I'll bring you back. Okay, so we've put this top, the top cap back on. Now, one thing I've done, which I kind of made a bit of a mistake there, I assumed, like I did on this nose cap, that you want the nose cap to compress against the outer race of the bearing to make sure the bearings can't move in the housing, because they sit up against a collar. Now, just trying to work through this quickly this morning, I made the mistake of thinking the top cap will do the same, but it doesn't. Now the top cap sits over the top, and from my own mistake now, I can tell you it doesn't need to be compressed against the bearing race. There's no shoulder in this whole section for the top bearings to sit against. So what ended up happening for me was, I thought, oh, the gap to the bearing was 4.7 millimetres, so let's make the top hat section 4.75 millimetres so it compresses on that outer race. So I ended up thinking, well, why is it so far out? Because it was only had a 1.5 millimetre top hat, and I wondered if it's because we've gone to angular contact bearings, and a standard bearing, like I assumed this would have, has a big wavy spacer in the middle, which will take up about 3 millimetres when compressed. Anyway, I turned some off of this to make that contact, and when I'd done this up, it actually bound the bearing slightly. It would spin, but you could feel the resistance, which obviously shouldn't be there at all. Now that must be because the inner races are on a shoulder, the outer races, I'm now trying to push them past where they should be, so the bearing is locking up. So I made a massive, it's not a huge mistake, but I made that mistake. You do not need to turn that to be on the bearing as far as I can work out. So I ended up skimming a bit off the spigot to take the nose. Now, the only thing it's done is lowered this cap. You can see I was 3 mil higher than this before, and it's done that. Luckily, I didn't go too far because, as I mentioned before, if I can just turn this round, you've got your thread there for your fitting, and not paying attention, I've only left just enough to get the thread in there. We didn't break the thread, but there should have been 3mm of meat on the underside of that. So I checked with a spare fitting that my fitting will still go in there and clear this edge. So we're lucky on that. So that's a mistake. I didn't need to do that. Again, this is where you don't know what you're doing and you're sort of playing it by eye and you're guessing at how the spindle is assembled. Now, whether if you had a wavy washer in there, that top would just about contact the bearings to stop them moving. Again, I don't know. But the way this spindle is now, with the other bearings on it, with the shrink fit and everything done where it should, this spindle shouldn't be able to move in this housing at all anyway. So the top's kind of irrelevant, and I should have sat for a second and just thought of that. So anyway, I took that off, didn't need to, but it's on there now. Slight bit of Loctite, that's bolted down. You can see the spindle is lovely and free. You feel no resistance or anything turning on there. Now I have to check the pulley. Now I've just marked it so I know. This is the top side of the pulley, so it's this way up. Now, I'm correct, I went back and looked at my video. There was 2mm spacing. Now it's not between this face now, because remember I turned some of this off as well because it was damaged, but it's 2mm from the shoulder of the spindle bearing retainer here to here, which makes, you can just see this faint line, and that's where the pulley was. And it works out, if I put 2mm spacers under here, off of this shoulder, it leaves 4mm, which actually lines up with that mark you can see on there. This shoulder mark here, 4mm. And looking at the previous videos, that seems to match up about right. So I'm going to get a couple of bits, 2 or 3 bits of 2mm alley. I'm going to rest them on that shoulder, and then when I put this pulley on and drop it in, I want to press it down so we've got approximately 4mm from the top of this, and then we are good to go. We are then good to start disassembling the other spindle from the other machine, because what I want to do is take that drawbar out of the other machine. I've got all new washers thanks to Aaron, CNC repairman. You can get the drawbar washers from cncreplacementparts.com over in the US, and soon you'll be able to get them from me in the UK. But we're going to build this up with the drawbar that's in the machine, but with all new Belleville washers, and a new top clip, new ball bearings and everything like that. So when we go back, we've got new spindle, new drawbar. So let me get this sorted. We're going to heat this up on the hot plate. We've got to just remove all this other junk that's accumulated literally in the last couple of hours while I've been doing this. Get this hot, put our spacers on here, and then we can get that on there and make sure that's in the right place. So we're heating it up on the hot plate, and we're going to go to the full 200, and that's the maximum of this hot plate. So we're going to get it up to 200. I've just went over that with a DA and then a little bit of red Scotch-Brite just to make sure there's no burrs and dirt in the inside of that. We've got a piece of tube ready that I've faced off each end. It'll be nice to sit on top of that, just in case we need to push down. So it's a perfect fit over there. We've got 6mm worth of alley spacers, so they're 2mm a piece. So we've got 4 to rest level with where I turn this down by mistake as such. And then the third one just sits over what is the shrink fit collar for the top bearings, and then that will give us the right height that when the pulley's pushed down to touch this, we'll be able to get these out, and then we will also have that 4mm gap that we said about at the top. So this has been on for about 10 minutes and it's at 80 degrees, so I'll put the camera back in the holder, and when we're ready to go, I'll show you it getting dropped on, and at 200 we'll see how easy it goes back over that, because it's absolute ridiculously difficult to take them off. So let's see how easily they go back on. Right, okay, so we've got this on the hot plate. The hot plate only goes to 200 and it's taken a long time, but we're currently at around 125. Now I've lifted this up using a couple of studs and gauged it over there, and it looks like it's going to slip on. So I'm going to go for it. I've got a feeling my microphone's about to run out as well, because that's flashing. So I'm not sure if you can see. Let's see if we can move you over here. So we're set up in the press, and I'm ready to use this to push down if we need to, but I don't think we will. I think we're going to be all right. So I'm using a couple of half UNC studs to lift this up rather than use my hands, and I'm only just threading them in, and let's go. Look at that, straight on. Take them studs out. Well, that was easy, wasn't it? Makes a change for me. Let's bring you out of there, and I'll take you out the holder. Okay, so that's the pulley fitted. Microphone's still good. So that's the pulley fitted on there. We've got the spacers. That's roughly the 4mm drop down gap we said about we had before. Pulley's the right way up. So I'm not sure how long that's going to take to cool. I'll let it cool. These spacers I'll be able to pull out, because you see they're a loose fit, and that is already in position there. By the look of that, look, I can take them out. But I'm going to leave them there just in case. I'm going to let that cool down properly, probably for a few hours now before I actually touch that or do anything with that. And I'll bring you back for the next step. So I'll see you in a second, which will be in a few hours. Okay, so it's the end of the day. The spindle and the pulley is now cooled down, or shall I say just the pulley is cooled down, and you can see it's lovely and free rotating. I did get a little bit worried because while it was still warm, it wasn't as free, but that shouldn't be an issue, and I guess it just expanded and the heat soak into the shaft maybe made the bearings at the top a bit tighter. But yeah, she's lovely and free, no noise. So that's pretty much ready to go. Just leave that over there to stop any dust going on that. I've took the head covers off the machine. Now, I'm not going to film the entire lot of this because I don't really see that you want to go through it all again. I'm pretty sure I took a lot of it off when I did the video removing the spindle. I can't remember, to be fair. We removed the head covers. I'll go through quickly what's going to happen. First thing you want to do is go into your settings and turn your parameter lock to off. Then go into your parameters, and parameter 76 on this early one is the air delay. Change it to 9 nines. So that's the absolute maximum before the machine will alarm out because of an air delay. Because what's going to happen is I'm going to disconnect the air from the back of the machine, so that when I unplug the tool release piston setup, if you do it when there's air in it, of course air's going to piss out and be a bit of a nightmare, and then it's going to alarm out anyway. So if you set them to all nines, it will allow you to completely disconnect the air from the machine. Then it will allow you to remove the tool release piston assembly in the airlines, but the machine won't alarm out, so you'll still be able to jog it up and down as you need to, because once you're going to remove the spindle, or when you're about to remove the spindle, you're going to want to jog it down to the table and some bits of wood, undo it, allow it to come down, and then you're going to need to jog the head up again out of the way. So that's why you want the air to be to not alarm out. So you see there, air delay, we've changed it to all nines, and I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9 nines is the most you can put in there, and then just make sure you change that back when you're finished. So when I'm doing something like this, I'll do myself a little list. So parameter 76, air delay, remember to change it back afterwards. The next thing on the list that will be down here at some point is remember to reset spindle orientation, because obviously when I put a new spindle in there, the pulley's gonna be disconnected from the belts and we won't know where the spindle orientation is. And the last thing you want to do is do a tool change and forget that the spindle is orientated 90 degrees out or something like that, and going to cause you damage. So if I come up here, I was surprised actually, I've given it a wipe down with a cloth, I should have showed you, that there was quite a lot of puddled oil again. So it shows you how quick all this horrible scum comes back under these covers when we're not up here cleaning it regularly. So it's only been about 6 months since I've done the gearbox, if that, I can't remember, I'd have to check. But it was getting oily already. So the next step is I'll turn the air off, I'll disconnect the tool release pressure switch here, which is just a plug-in connector, nice and simple. I'll disconnect this hose, I'll disconnect this hose, and then I will disconnect the tool release in and out switches, and then undo these 5/16 socket cap heads, or they take a 5/16 Allen key, and then I'll be able to remove this. Whilst this is out, I'm actually going to rebuild this. I say rebuild it, I'm just going to put new O-rings in it, and I'm going to replace this Humphrey valve, just as a matter of course while it's here. I don't want to take this off and do it again. So we're going to replace the seals and the O-rings in here. We're going to replace the Humphrey valve. Now, I will be able, little snippet here for the fact I'll be selling seals for these and the Humphrey valves on my website at some point. Some stuff's on there. It's not really up and running yet, but I'm going to do a complete separate video about that at a later date. But I will be able to supply seals and the quick exhaust valves on my website in the future. So bear that in mind. So yes, we're going to take this off. Then we will disconnect the oil air line. Now, this is the oil air line I'm on about, and it comes and feeds in here. And you probably won't be able to see it from there, but you will see it when I take it out, that it goes into the back of the spindle in that little fitting where I showed you. And this supplies a constant supply there when the machine is powered. Obviously it's in E-stop at the minute, so it's not powered, and you get an oil drip going in here. Now before I fit the my shoddy rebuilt spindle into the machine, I'll do a test on this line just to make sure. I did put a new metering unit in the bottom where it drips the oil into the airline, but to make sure there is a procedure, and I checked it on the Haas that I sold, that you basically feed this line just into a bottle, and after say 2 hours of the spindle being at 50 RPM, something like that, you should see a certain amount of oil. And it's not a lot, but X amount of drops of oil. It's something like 6 cl of oil in the bottom of a pot. So what I'll do is I'll disconnect this. I will remove the oil line from the back if I can get to it. Then I'll put this back on. Then I will run the spindle, because the spindle has to be running for the air oiler to work, and the machine has to think the spindle's running. I'll run the machine for, I think it's about an hour or 2 hours, with the bottle attached to the oil line to see how much oil we actually get out of it. And I'm not so fussed about or how you measure the exact quantity. I just want to see that oil is definitely getting in there, and I'm pretty sure it's good here, but I want to check that. So yeah, I'll jump to the bit where we see how much oil is in after we've been running for a few hours. So you're not going to miss much, but I'll bring you back shortly. Okay, so we've taken the tool release piston off to get to the top of the spindle and the spindle belts. Now, for those of you who did want to see taking the tool release piston assembly off the machine, it's quite straightforward, but I'm going to do it as a separate video. So weirdly, I'm jumping back and forward, and I'm going to make 2 videos out of one. So if you want to see that, that will be up before this or at the same time as this as a separate video. So the TRP is removed, and you can see now we've got the top of our spindle pulley and our belts there. Now this spindle is actually sounds okay with the bearing wise, and it doesn't seem to be much, if any, up and down play in the bearing like I had on the one that's just been rebuilt. But this one obviously has got really bad taper and sticks really bad and horrendous, and I mean horrendous tool fretting. The belts look okay. Again, I should have got new belts really, but it's not an issue to change the belts, and these are still quite good, so I'm going to stick with them. So if you see it's going to be difficult, let me grab a torch because I'll show you that air oil mist line I talked about, which is quite difficult to get to, quite difficult to see. But you'll just about see it. So in there, the belt is in the way, and I don't think I'm going to be able to get the camera in there. Everything's a bit too, you can just see it there. I know that's the worst quality going. Try and get a better light in there. No, I can't get a better light. You can just see it out of focus down there, just to the left of that bit of belt. So that is your air oil lube line. You can see it poking through the casting, and that's the one that comes out here, and it feeds all the way to the back of the machine, goes through the back of the machine, and it's attached to the regulator, not the main panel, the regulator behind the panel. Now this needs to be set at, I believe it's 17 psi when the spindle's running. You can adjust it on the top there, and then from that, how will I see? Let's try and get this side if I can. Basically, you can see this airline here. Oh, I'm trying to jam the camera in there. I've still got the camera on the tripod, so it's not the easiest. There's this line here going to that, and above it, sorry, it's really poor picture, but that airline goes to that regulator, and there's a metering unit which is similar to what's on the lube lines on the rest of the system, but it is not the same metering unit. The spindle metering unit is different. It allows a completely different oil amount to be passed through the system along with the air. So anyway, there's your air oil mist setup for those who were curious as to why I didn't grease up the spindle bearings, because they're lubricated by an air oil mist. Anyway, let's get back to it, because I know my videos have got a tendency to be a bit long and boring. But anyway, what we need to do now is we need to move the belts from the spindle pulley so that we can get our hand down here and get to that air oil lube line. And I don't think I'm going to do that with the belts in place. It's a 1/8 MPT threaded fitting, but I'm not sure about the size of the actual nut on it. So I'm going to have a bit of fiddling around to see if I can get to it. But I've got a feeling that the belts come off first. Now, to remove the belts, you've got to break loose the gearbox. So you need to take out the bolts to the gearbox, and you need to shunt it forward. Now, be wary that this gearbox will want to tilt forward on you, and if it's not propped up, or if you're not holding it, or someone else is not holding it, this will tip. Now, because of the oil can at the bottom, the reservoir for the gearbox, it can't tip fully forward, but it will tip forward. And just in case, you know, it's going to put stress and strain if you leave it under its own weight, be careful, have someone else hold it for you, or just have something to prop it up whilst you put it forward to get the belts off. Now, I'm going to put the camera over on the side, and I'll try and record it while I'm doing it, because I'm on my own and it's a little bit difficult, but let's get it done. Okay, so I've taken out all bar one bolt at the minute for the gearbox. Just taking that last one out now. And I've got myself a little bit of wood under here to stop it tilting too far forward. Now, like I said, ideally you want to have someone helping you with this to make it easier and safer. This one bolt typically keeps going loose then tight as it undoes. Let's try it now. There we go. Okay, so all the bolts are out the gearbox. There's 6 in total, 3 on either side. Now, you just break it loose because it just gets a little bit stuck due to the oil in there. Now I've got this wood here. The box will tilt, but it won't fall any further than that. So definitely have something there. You could do with something a little bit higher than that. So if you get something that's a nice fit between this gap here, you won't have to worry about it tilting too far. So once we're loose, I'm just gonna shimmy it forward. You can't go much, but that's just enough to be able to get the belts off. So there's 1 belt off, there's 2 belts off. Once it's off, shimmy it back again. Take 1 bolt, any one, I'm going to go for the middle one now, and then try and put that back in so there's no risk of it tilting down on you. Now the belts, if you're changing them, you then need to get into how you feed the belts off the back of the machine and the back of the pulley. I'm not changing these ones on this occasion, so I'm just going to push them down to one side. I want to be sort of careful with them because you don't want to damage them. And now I've got to get in, as I said before, see if I can get the camera in any further now. I've got to get back here and I've got to loosen off that fitting just there. So that is pretty fiddly. I'm going to get in there and get that taken out, the fitting, and I'll bring you back. I'm not going to sit you there watching me, but I'll bring it back and I'll show you and I'll let you know what size spanner we needed to take that off. Right, so what I've ended up having to do in here is the airline, which is this one, that goes into the fitting down there that you can see. It's ridiculously tight on the compression side of it. So I managed to get the nut undone because what was happening, as I'm undoing the fitting from the housing, the airline won't twist in the end of the fitting. So as you undo it, it's springing back again. And you do quarter turn and it springs back a quarter turn. So I'm getting nowhere. So what I ended up doing was snipping off literally as close as I could possibly get to that fitting in there. Just cut it off with a pair of cutters as close as I could. And then I'll redo the fitting afterwards. And I'm tempted, I don't think it will restrict it. In advance, I bought some 8th MPT push fits to 6mm hose because then you can get your hand in there and pop that out of the way and then undo the fitting. So that's the original compression nut side of it. And then I should be able to just get my hand in there and untwist the fitting, which you can. And there's the other part of the fitting. So it's just MPT to a compression style. You can see there's like a plastic type olive on there and set up. So if you used a push fit in that, I can't see that being any problems and it should work fine. So we'll put that over there as it is. So there's the oil line. Now this is the one that we are now going to, I can do it when the spindle's out because it should still run okay. I could put these back into the, not that one, sorry, this is the oil one, don't want to get them mixed up. I can put these back into the tool release piston, bolt it back on there, bolt the gearbox down, drop the spindle out of the way, and then I can basically run the gearbox because it doesn't know that the spindle's not running, obviously because all the sensors and the encoders are attached via the gearbox end of the machine. Nothing else is attached to the spindle. So I can then run this oil line down here into a bottle that I mentioned before, and run it for a couple of hours to just make sure that we're getting oil collecting. So when we put the new spindle in, we know the new bearings and everything are going to get a nice supply of oil. So now everything's out of the way there. If you're going to run the gearbox, obviously you need to make sure them belts are well out of the way, or they're going to wrap around here, get chewed up. So at this point here, this is where this spindle, we can jog the head down and then we can take the spindle out. But first thing I want to do, just to be secure, is I've got the gearbox tilted up and I'm going to put it back down, and we're going to make sure that isn't going to go anywhere. So now that can't fall forward. Now we've got one bolt in there, we're not going to worry about that tipping over. That is safe. So let's look at getting the belts out of the way, and the way to do that is we've pushed them off the front here, and they'll just go down the front of the gearbox, oil sump down there, and then you're going to need to come in from the side, because you don't want to be laying under this because the machine is still powered. You could block this up ideally. Get your hand up through the access panel and remove the belts. It's a little bit fiddly, but you can get your hand up in there and remove them belts, and then they're out of the way. And you can either replace them, which would be good. I kind of wish I'd ordered them, but I did make the mistake, break off into another little story here. I did make the mistake that I actually ordered some belts. So these two are old belts, these are new ones. I ordered new belts and they're too wide. In the UK, I ordered these 20mm wide, and they're too wide to go on the pulley, on the gearbox end, because it's got like a retaining shoulder ring. They'll be okay on the spindle pulley, which is where I measured them, but they won't go on the gearbox end because the pulley belts need to be 3/4, which is 19.05mm. So bear that in mind if you order your own belts. Obviously, if you're ordering them from Haas, you won't have that issue. So I'm going to get the belts out, I'm going to jog it down, I'm going to unbolt it, and I'll show you removing the spindle, which you've seen before, but we'll go through it again. Okay, so we've lowered the head down onto our blocks. So we just lowered it down using the hand wheel there. Obviously you can use the hand wheel on the pendant, and we just lower it down so the block is semi-snug under there. Now before I lowered it, I undone all the bolts around the spindle except for the front one, so that there's easy access, because the ones under here will be a bit more difficult to get to. So one bolt will hold it in fine. So undone all of them except for this one. Now I actually decided to leave the belts in for a minute, and then when the spindle's removed, I'll have a lot more room to get my hand in there to get the belts out. So everything's disconnected, and we are now going to just remove this bolt, which is the final one. Now, some of you may or may not know that this casting has got, if you can see in there, this hole down here is for filling oil. Now, the coolant goes in here and flows around this casting, but there's a separate water jacket, oil jacket around the spindle that is supposed to be filled with oil. Now I know this one hasn't got oil in it because I had this spindle, I put this spindle in, but the machine, the donor machine this come out of, when I lifted the head up, whoosh, load of oil come out, because the oil is meant to be like a coolant that then, so the oil around it soaks up the heat from the spindle, and the coolant running around the casting takes the heat away. So it's just basically to keep the spindle that little bit cooler. Now I didn't put it in when I fitted this because I kind of knew it wouldn't be in there too long. And a lot of machines, from what I've spoke to a few techs, no one ever bothers to fill them up, or they don't even know that that was a thing, and they're the technicians. I assume the new machines don't run like that. So we're now ready to jog this up, and there won't be any oil coming out of here, but be aware that on your machine there may well be oil comes out of there. So there we go, there's our spindle. And this is why you've got one big O-ring on there, because the O-ring seals up in here, and if I climb back up on the machine, you will see that there's a machined surface at the top and one at the bottom, and you fill the oil up through this hole here. and then this slight recess in the casting fills with oil and helps to dissipate the heat from the spindle by passing the coolant around that oil jacket and carrying the heat away. That's the that is the theory. So there's our spindle out, and this one's quiet with regards to the bearings. It's just got a terrible terrible taper. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to put that in the press, and I'm going to remove the drawbar. It's in a previous video. If you watched the very first video of removing the spindle from the vf3, it's in there, so I'm not going to record that, but I will show you the drawbar out and I will rebuild it. I'm going to put new washers on it and I'll show you it after that. So this is where we're at. Spindle's out in the machine. We're getting ready to put the new one back in, but first we've got to rebuild the drawbar, and we've got to do the seals and the quick exhaust on the tool release piston, which I'm going to be doing that as a separate video. It gets confusing, but stay with us and you'll be able to see it all. So bring you back in a moment. Okay, so I've just got the drawbar assembly here. Now, previously I mentioned that I had 81 of these Belleville washers, and I was going to rebuild them with some new ones I got, but they're actually a slightly different thickness, which added up to a different stack height. So I've decided, because I had an old drawbar from that and the original one from this that had some cracked springs, I had plenty of good springs with no cracks to build up a drawbar again. Now, I got a quote from Haas for a drawbar assembly exactly 1 year ago today, and the part number was 93-30-3410D, and that was £468 in the UK plus VAT and delivery, so about £600 all in. And then when I looked back on that quote and I was looking at the drawbar force that this had, I told you before, if you see my old video, I had 40 bar of drawbar force going by my drawbar force gauge, which equated to around, 1 second, just trying to look back on my chart here, around 800 kilograms of force on the drawbar, which put it to around £1,600 roughly, you know, give or take, which put it on the low side of Haas's scale, because I found something on Haas's website that said the VMC 40 taper should be between £1,460, I believe it was, I wrote it down, between £1,460 to £2,300. Now, I don't know when that's referenced from, and I think that must be newer machines, because if you Google and look on Haas's site at that drawbar assembly, the 3410D, it actually says the force on that is between £1,000 and £1,300. So that's quite a big difference. So that's 455 kilograms of force to 590 kilograms of force, and my gauge, my drawbar force gauge is in bar, so that's between 23 and 30 bar. Now previously I had 40 bar and I had 81 washers rather than 79, so potentially, along with the bad taper, I might have had the issue that this was actually too tight, the tool was being held too tight into the spindle. And my vibration and issues were the knackered taper. So it's going to be interesting. So what I've done is I've gone back to 79 washers. I put this in the spindle and I tested the force, and I was at 20 bar. Now both of my spindles, this is the original one and the original drawbar, and then I've got another drawbar here which was disassembled. I pulled it all apart from that spindle, which was from the vf3 year 2001 or 1999 that I scrapped and I took everything off of. Both of those spindles had a small stack of spacers, just little washers. So they're not Belleville, they are just normal washers. I did have some more of them here. So these ones were out of that drawbar originally, which was this one. And there was 5 on this one, there was 4 on this one. So I think they used that to preload them to get a little bit more force. I assume, I don't know. So what I'm going to do now is put this back in the spindle, and I will then measure the force. And if this, as it says, is going to be a £1,300 max drawbar, I'm going to aim for 30 bar on the gauge. So let's get this back in the spindle and we'll check it and see where we're at. So I've got some blocks there on the press. I'll put you guys back in the stand here so you can hopefully see what I'm doing. The other thing, this drawbar, which is, it's all greased up now, but this is the original one out of the vf3, or say the original, it's the one that was in it when I got it. It's a through spindle coolant drawbar. It's got the double washers at the bottom there, and it's got the carbide insert in the top. So at some point, it seems like the 10K spindle and the through spindle drawbar assembly must have been come from another machine. So we'll put that in, and it will literally just lower it into there as it's greased up. Now you've got an O-ring at the top here which is going to make it slightly snug to go down, so I'll just gently tap that in there because I don't want to damage the O-rings, but they're plenty greased so they should be okay. Now I'm going to sit the spindle on the blocks, compress it and put the tool in it and we'll see what it reads. Just make sure it's not contacting the nose of the spindle, make sure we're clear. Also want to make sure it's lined up square under there, nothing's going to fall off. I'll press onto this, it's not going to do any damage because I'm not hammering into it or anything like that. Now I just need to see where I put my gauge. I've got everything in such a mess. Let me just find where I actually put it. Found it. So there's our gauge. I'm literally running out of space, I've got stuff everywhere. So if you watch the other video, you've seen this before, and as said, I had 40 bar of pressure before. So let's see what it is now. Could do with 2 pairs of hands here really, but I should be able to pull this down. Okay, so that is in there. And now we've got exactly 33 bar on the gauge. 33 bar, so that's at the top end. If anything, it's a tiny little bit over, and maybe I could take out 1 washer, but as these washers are going to fatigue more over time because they're not new anyway, that's going to drop. So I'm going to leave that, which puts us at the high end of the spec, like I just said. We said 23 to 30 bar, and what did I say I'm at? 32 or 33 bar. So we're going to leave that and call that good. So whilst that tool's in there, I'll put my circlip back at the top. Now, when you look on the Haas parts on the spindle and it gives you a circlip number, it actually shows it for a just this kind of circlip, just your normal run-of-the-mill circlip. But with the kits and that was in there originally is this kind of circlip. Now I'm not sure what this type is called specifically, but that's what they seem to have in them, whereas the part number listed on the old manuals shows a normal internal groove circlip like this. So I bought them just in case, but we're going to get one of these put back in. So I'm going to put that back in, and then I'm going to look at getting the spindle back into the mill, and we'll go from there. I just wanted to show you guys the info on the drawbar and the fact that I was looking for 2,300 pounds maximum of force on the drawbar, when it seems, going by their manual, that's not the case. It's 1,300 pounds, you know, it's a big difference, 1,000 pounds of force. So hopefully, with a good taper now, and less drawbar force, everything will be good connection, nice and tight, rigid, and it should make the tools easier to come out, as well as having the better taper making it easier to come out. So yeah, let's get the circlip in, get it back in the machine, and I'll bring you back. Okay, so the spindle's back in the machine, and we're just checking the air oil lubrication to make sure we're not going to put the spindle in the machine and then run the bearings dry or anything like that. As previously said, I'm pretty sure that the oil's good. I've never had no oil issue in the past, but while we're here we might as well check it properly. So we've plugged the tool release piston assembly back in. It's not bolted down, we just have to plug it in so we get rid of the unclamp alarm on here. Then whilst we're up there, we've slid the belts off of the gearbox end pulley as well, so they're out of the way. And now we are running the spindle at 50 RPM. Now the gearbox is turning, the oil supply to the gearbox is running, but obviously the spindle's not connected because the belts are not attached. Now if you're going to do this, you probably won't be able to see in there, but make sure the belts aren't accidentally going to catch the pulley and get dragged round, because you might do some damage. So make sure the belts are well clear, or even better, remove them completely. And then what I've got is the air line coming down here, which carries the oil mist for the spindle, is spraying into this bottle. Now we've got a lid on it, and we've got a little hole there, because obviously if you put that in tight and seal it, it's going to want to blow the bottle up, so to speak, or it will just blow the bottle off the hose. And now we're going to run this for a couple of hours and see that we get oil in there. I can't remember how much oil it is that's meant to be in there after a set period of time, but I've got nothing to measure such a small quantity of oil anyway. So what I'm going to do is leave it running for a couple of hours. Once I see oil, that's pretty much good enough for me, as long as I know the spindle's going to get oil. So in a couple of hours I'll bring you back and we'll see what's in the bottom of the bottle. Okay, so we've been running the oil test only for 1 hour, because I want to get it put back together, but we're seeing oil, so I don't think we need to run it for the full 4 hours. But just to show you, I went onto the one of the Haas pages and found a picture of the quantity of oil that they show that's collected after 4 hours of use, and it's very little amount of oil. Now bear in mind, this is with the newer machines with the it's called a drip sight glass, something like that, which my machine doesn't have, but it just shows you roughly what oil's being collected after a 4 hour period. So you can see in that bottle after 4 hours it's collected a very small amount of oil, and it says there after 4 hours observe the collected oil. There's the example picture, and it says about 6 to 10 drops visible in the sight glass for each pump cycle, and that is on the newer system. Now we are still set up on the old system here. The newer sight glass setup and the pump setup, I wouldn't mind it, but it's about £1,300 I was told. Now that's just a bit extreme. If this is working, I'm not going to change it. If one come up at a cheaper price, or it was a bit cheaper for an upgrade, like £300 or £400, it wouldn't be so bad, but I'm definitely not paying that when this works. So I'll show you what we've collected after 1 hour of use, or 1 hour of use, to say 1 hour of the oil lube system being in, and it literally looks like nothing in there, but see, it's difficult to see for the oil in there, and there's a little bit running down the sides as well. So that's 1 hour. So compare that 1 hour to the 4 hours on the picture there, and you can see it's working. So what I'm going to do let's kill that noise. What I'm going to do is get everything buttoned back up now and done, and then I'm going to jump into replacing the seals and stuff on the tool release piston and replacing the Humphrey quick exhaust valve while I'm here. But that's going to be done in a separate video, so if you want to see that, keep your eyes out, and there'll be a separate video about replacing the seals and the quick exhaust valve on the tool release piston assembly. So let's get this button back up, and we'll look at doing the spindle running, or spindle braking, whichever you want to call it. While I'm up on the machine, I just wanted to show you something that I got when I had a visit from Aaron Morrill, a CNC repairman. He's got the website in the US called cncreplacementparts.com. Does loads of stuff for various CNC machines, but mainly caters for Haas compatible parts. But when he came over and visited me, he bought me a couple of tools, and one of them is the tool to tighten the belt when you're doing the belts between the gearbox and the gearbox or the motor and the spindle, because it's quite fiddly to tighten and tension these belts when you're on your own. Now, it's a very simple tool. Yes, you can make them yourself, but if you haven't got the facilities, or you don't want to, or you want to get one because you can't be bothered to make your own one, it uses the 4 bolts that hold down the tool release piston assembly, and 2 of them will go in the back here, and it's got different sizes for the different tool release pistons, and you use 2 bolts to hold it down, and you use the front 2 to push the housing back and just give you tension on the belt, because it's very difficult, if not, to push this assembly backwards and tighten down the bolts. So with this, I've done mine now, but literally 2 bolts in there, finger tight, push off that ever so slightly. The belts aren't meant to be very tight, because too tight and they make noise, too loose and you get a bit of vibration. So normally I have to change it 1 or 2 times to get it right. But very simple tool, very handy to get the job done. So thank you very much for that, Aaron, CNC repairman. And this is probably something that we can supply on my website in the future. So yeah, if you want one, keep your eyes peeled and they should be listed on there. Okay, so the spindle's in the machine and it's running, which is good news. So that's the start. So we're running the braking cycle for a new spindle. I found this cycle and program laid out on Haas's website, and I've literally just, see, we're running through it now. We're just dwelling at 10 RPM for 30 minutes currently. So just scribbled down, we've got 1000 RPM for 10 minutes, 3750 for 10 minutes, 7500 for 1 minute, 10 RPM for 30 minutes, 7500 for 1 minute, and currently we're at 10 RPM for 30 minutes. Then it's 3750 for 30 minutes, then the painful one, 7500 for 30 minutes, then 1000 RPM for 10 minutes and 10 RPM for 30 minutes. So it's running and we're about just under halfway through, but what is good to see is, see that? That is oil. So that is nice, clean oil. That is running out the spindle. We're 2 hours in. Obviously you saw what was collected in the bottle. We're 2 hours into the cycle. No, we're not. We're about an hour and a half, sorry. And there's oil coming through the spindle. So that's reassuring to know that during this braking cycle, the bearings are definitely getting oil and we're not going to have any issues in that sense. So far so good. At 7500 RPM for the 1 minute it sounds okay. Obviously it's not going to make a difference now, but we have been monitoring the spindle housing, like the main casing temp, just on the front here. Obviously when it's doing next to nothing, it's nice and cold as you'd expect it to be, and it's quite cold here, the ambient temperature anyway at the minute. So yeah, we're going to let that run through. So we've got another almost exactly 2 hours left to go. So we're going to get that done. Fingers crossed there's no issues when we get to the 7,500 for 30 minutes. So yeah, just wanted to show you that she's getting oil during the braking cycle. So that gives me a little sigh of relief that at least it's not got issues straight away. So yeah, I'll bring you back when the cycle's done, and it'd be good to, I'm excited to take some cuts and see how she cuts, but let's get this out of the way first, so see you soon. Just wanted to bring you back as an update. So we're currently on the 7,500 RPM for 30 minutes, part of the cycle. So we've got 40 minutes after this, but we're about 28 minutes into this 7,500 RPM cycle. The spindle is only warm to the touch, which is nice. If we check it with our tent gun, see we're only maximum of just over 24 degrees, and it was 19 when it was running at low RPM or ambient, so that's good to know that 30 minutes constant, I know it's not in cut, but 30 minutes constant and the spindle is running at a very, very reasonable temperature. I remember on the old spindle, if I run at 7,500 RPM for about 5 minutes, it would get very, very hot to the touch, where you wouldn't want to rest your hand on it. So the braking cycle is going good. You can see the oil being dragged around there from the, I guess from like the air velocity of the tool. So we're still getting a nice feed of oil, and we've got approximately 40 minutes left of the cycle. We've got to do 1,000 RPM for 10 minutes, and then it will do 10 RPM for 30 minutes, and that's the spindle fully broke in. So, yeah, that's a good thing. We'll bring you back when it's all completed. Okay, so that's the spindle warm-up or spindle break-in completed. Everything seems good. We had a good oil supply. We didn't have no strange noises from the machine. Maybe a little bit of vibration from the belt, so possibly they'll do with slackening off. But I'll leave it for the moment, and I'll see how I get on with that when I start doing some test cuts. But apologies, it's such a long-winded video, but for those of you who are looking to do the same thing, you find a lot of the information useful, and it's not the sort of thing where you can cut bits out. Ideally, you want to show people from start to finish, so it is a little bit long-winded, so apologies. But that is it for this video. The spindle's in the machine. It's got new bearings, it's got a reground taper. The spindle's been straightened after me heating it up and bending it. We've assembled it in an everyday workshop with mess and a bit of dust and grubby hands. So yeah, we'll see how it works. Come back on the next video and I'm going to get a job set up on the machine and we'll look at some test cuts. I'm actually doing a job at the moment with some steel. Now this one's only mild steel, but I started the job on this machine and every single tool got stuck. Every single tool change required the mallet, optional stop the mallet to get the tool out of the spindle, and then also every single cut the spindle was really badly squealing and I was breaking tools again. So I've transferred that job into here. So that job is now doing op 1 and op 2 of these parts over there. I'm going to carry on with that, but as we get nearer to the end, just for the sake of it, I'm going to take that job out of there, set it back up in here, and I'll bring you back and I'll show you how it cuts. So yeah, look out for the next video. Thanks again for watching the videos. Please like and subscribe if you like the content. It really will help if you guys subscribe to the channel. If there's anything else you'd like to see, let me know, but I think that's it for this one. So yeah, stay tuned. Next up, test cuts.